Boa tarde. O meu nome é Andrea Magalhães e sou diretora artística do Centro de Arte Oliva. Obrigada por terem vindo. Eu estou aqui para apresentar a nossa convidada, a Catherine David, e a comunicação que vai realizar hoje, Modern Art and Art Brut, Anatomy of a Misunderstanding. Este é um evento que é realizado no âmbito da exposição Teatro Anatómico, uma exposição que tem a curadoria de João Sousa Cardoso, e é uma exposição que foi criada a partir da coleção Treger Saint Silvestre, que está aqui em depósito no Centro de Arte Oliva, tem a particularidade e foi um primeiro momento de um novo trabalho que começamos a fazer também com a coleção, e que foi de dirigir o convite a 3 artistas com quem o João sugeriu convidar para participarem da exposição: o André Sousa, o Horácio Frutuoso e o Fernão Cruz, a quem agradeço a presença aqui hoje também. Este, de facto, é um tema de fundo que tem sido parte do trabalho que nós temos desenvolvido através do nosso programa de exposições e também de todas as atividades que vamos desenvolvendo, não é? Porque esta conciliação que se propicia aqui no Centro de Arte Oliva, do encontro entre estas categorias todas que nós vamos manejando com alguma dificuldade, quais são as separações da arte bruta, arte contemporânea, quais são as classificações exatamente de uma obra artística. Não? Ok, pronto, obrigada. Mas na realidade eu queria mesmo também apresentar a Catherine David. Acho que dispensa apresentações para o público que nós temos hoje aqui presente, mas como sabem, a Catherine David é uma das curadoras mais reconhecidas da Europa, também historiadora de arte, não só pelo trabalho curatorial que tem desenvolvido ao longo de todos estes anos, mas também pela direção de vários projetos artísticos, nomeadamente o Vídeo, em Roterdão, na Holanda, e com a vice-direção do Centro Jorge Pompidou, até a qual esteve recentemente muito ligada, e também muito reconhecido pelo facto de ter sido comissária, diretora artística da 10ª Documenta de Kassel, que foi uma documenta de Kassel que introduziu uma ruptura com alguns paradigmas, nomeadamente com a integração de artistas não ocidentais. Catherine, muito obrigada por estar hoje aqui presente, e peço um warm welcome to our speaker.
The word art brut is existing from the moment when modernity is developing. You never spoke about art brut before modern. So there is a kind of a very, very intriguing, complex, conflictive articulation between the space of modern art and the space of what is not modern art, what is outside from modern art, and which is becoming art brut in 1945. We have to be very precise, 1945, because this is the title, the category initiated by Jean Dubuffet. And before, it was not at all used. Even so, again, you always had works produced. And I prefer the notion of aesthetical expressions developed, because, the notion of works is already a little bit intentionalized outside from the species of art or cultural specific species. And I think that you could refer to pre-art brut when you would deal with prisoners, mystical people, religious people who were making drawings, writing bizarre things alone in their own species, and productions which were not supposed to be surely not exposed, but not even shared, not circulated. So this said, so now we go back we are no more in the Middle Ages, we are in the 20th century, and you have a few key moments in the definition, because it's a definition which is, on one hand, never very precise, but changing and moving, sometimes for political reasons, sometimes for ideological, obvious reasons, sometimes for, especially these days, for market reasons. And it's we have, even so, we can identify key moments in the definition or identification in terms of visibility and cultural discussion on and around art brut. So one, of course, key moment is the end of 19th century and the beginning of the 20s, with the first, what we can accept as the first collections, but surely not first collections of Art Brut as such, because the word, the formula didn't exist yet. But from the end of 19th century, you begin to have works collected, specific works, which are at the time mainly works made, drawings, text, testimonies, which are left by mental people who are mentally sick and who are working or who are with psychiatrists who think for many reasons, that many different reasons sometimes, that these works have to be kept, not thrown away, as it happened a lot in the past. They have to be kept, sometimes because the psychiatrists just find that this is very interesting, beautiful, moving, often because they want to keep the drawings as for working on the case, for accompanying the patient. And this will end with the early collections, very well kept, and which are still available, they are still preserved. And it's also very interesting because with the passing of time, we know now more or less who the people who went to the psychiatric hospital or often collections in places which are no more the hospitals, for looking at the collection. And of course, you have very, very important physicians, but also poets, writers. So it's a very interesting community, cultural community, which is little by little developing from this specific interest and specific knowledge for these collections of mainly drawings and other works made, because it's not only drawings, but it's circulating, it's easier with drawings, which are collected, or I would prefer to say gathered, because I think that on the beginning, I don't think that Hans Prinzhorn would have said he was collecting. He was keeping and gathering works by his patients in Heidelberg. And we have also to mention that on the very beginnings, it was especially this early preservation of the drawings by the patients was especially active in northern countries in Europe, and mainly Austria, Switzerland. And before becoming a collector, Dubuffet spent a lot of time traveling. It was like, we say that it's a little bit provocative, but he had a kind of tour of the psychiatric hospitals in Switzerland in the late 20s, where he saw many, many collections, and he began to identify different attitudes, different styles, etc., before really beginning his collection. So it's quite interesting to see that at the time, before including André Breton and Jean Paulhan and many others in the discussions, he was, first of all, discussing with physicians, psychiatrists, or people who were very close to the patients and who were really able to elaborate on the, that's a word I won't pronounce yet, intentionality, because I think there is a big issue with Art Brut, which is the question of intentionality. But we have to keep in mind that the beginning of Dubuffet was also into the tradition of this collecting of mental patients, sick, malades mentaux. Comment on dit ça? People who were skilled, mentally skilled. No, I wanted to avoid crazy. That's why it's so complicated, because I don't want to use crazy. So let's say mental patients. So from apart from Hans Prinzhorn, who became very famous because of the collection, because the way it circulated and so on and so forth, there is also, and you have many, but I will mention the very, very famous ones, Walter Morgenthaler, who was the director of one of the best physicians from Waldow Clinic. And Waldow Clinic, you will see mentioned in many, many novels from the early 20th century, because you had many people with, at the time, that's why it's people were not saying, even in French, fou, the people with nervous issues, problèmes nerveux. Very often you see he went to Waldow, he had some nervous, des problèmes nerveux, en français on dit, nervous issues. So it means many different kinds of pathology. And this Morgenthaler collection became very, very famous because one of the patients became one of the early heroes of Art Brut, and it's Wolfie. So of course, it became very, very famous. And Wolfi, in Vado, they had hundreds and hundreds of drawings by Wolfi, so it became very famous because also of this very, very specific production and this quite soon famous patient. And so I won't speak about all, but I'm just speaking about those who are still asking very interesting questions and which are still connecting with problems we have today. In the late 30s and 40s, and he always mentioning places Dubuffet visited, and he had some connection and discussion with the people. In the late 30s, you have in Saint-Alban, it's a very famous psychiatric hospital for very good and very bad reasons. Very good reasons is the arrival in the late 30s of François Toscals, who is a Catalan, very, very important Catalan psychiatrist and physician. And he left, he had to leave very fast Spain after the defeat of the Republican. He was a Spanish Republican, so he arrived in Saint-Alban and he went on developing a very inventive, very innovative strategy with the patients. And it's really like Saint-Alban is really like the prehistory of Laborde, which will be this other very famous. They never accepted, we would say it's a mental hospital, so let's say this in French, we have this institution, open institution, which was one of the fleurons of antipsychiatry, where Félix Guattari was formed in the 50s, and it ended in the collaboration. You see marks of Laborde in the collaboration between Guattari and Deleuze, so meaning that Gilles Deleuze was not a psychoanalyst, but he really took advantage. He shared a lot of knowledge from the common work with Deleuze. And you could say that it was very influential. The bad memory of, and it's something which was not really discussed till recently, the bad memory for Saint-Alban is that, and we have now more and more documents, that during the war it was a place where so many patients died of not eating enough. They were just left over, and you had a very high level of people of death. So it was really not just them, and not far from Saint-Alban, you had another very famous patient who was never Art Brut, and I think it would be really crazy to identify him with Art Brut, who is Antonin Artaud. Antonin Artaud was in Rodez, which is not far at all from Saint-Alban, and he was submitted to very, very tough treatments. And when he came back from Rodez, he kept on doing these amazing drawings. Not exactly the same he did in Rodez, which are very, very, you can identify very easily. And by the way, I would like to mention, because it's not well known, unfortunately, these drawings are very fragile and they can be shown permanently and never for long terms. But the National Museum of Modern Art in Paris, because of Artaud, because of connection with the close guard around Artaud, because of people who were extremely ethical and extremely generous, meaning they all had decided that when they would die, the drawings given or bought to Artaud, very often given, would go to the museum and at acceptable prices. So the result of that is that apart from one, which is still in a private collection, all the drawings by Artaud are in the collection of the National Museum of Modern Art in Paris, and they were shown long time ago, in the late 80s. So now we were the 60s. So you have this moment. We arrived after the end of the 20th century, but you have this really the very beginnings, of the collection. And at that time, it was not at all for the market. It was really first for reasons which had to do with mental sickness, which had to do with the understanding of the mental process. How would it be possible to help the patient? But little by little, it moved, and it became, in a way, a theme of discussions, what is art and what kind of art is it, what is it bringing into the discussion, what it is bringing into the conception of art, etc., etc. So, of course, you already had a certain number of discussions. In the middle of that, you have all the surrealist moment where André Breton and many people around him were absolutely, to a certain extent, overemphasizing all the productions made by subjects who were not, how to that? You can't say they were not conscious at all, but, who were producing under very loose consciousness and all these experimental sessions you had around the surrealist. Of course, they had a lot of, part of it was inspired from this, not only they knew because they had seen, but also they had many discussions about this very specific drawing. So, it's kind of a cultural space which is opening, which is very, very, not confused, but very complex at the time. And you have another moment which is very important, which is the post-war. I think that people sometimes they don't really realize that in between the different moments you had this massive event, which was the Second World War, and this is beginning with 1945, again, the definition of Art Brut by Jean Dubuffet. And I want to mention, because you have so many, even by himself, he changed or he complexified so many times that it's a little bit after it's between language issues and ideology. And I would like just to say that it's from the beginning a definition which is always oscillating, articulating social and aesthetical levels. So social, of course, because you have all the part of who are the people producing Art Brut. People who are sick, people who are outside, people who are medium, people who are prisoners, people who are outside from the central cultural thing, and little by little, you have so many different people that there is a moment when it becomes very difficult to decide what is inside, what is outside. This is one thing. Second, and I think it's also a situation people don't sometimes consider or don't remember or don't want to remember, which is that after 45, you see in poetry, in literature, in art, and also in many philosophical discussions, a lot of ideas, a lot of concepts which have to do with a situation we identified in many cases in France for when we would work on exhibitions or when we would try to periodize the cultural production. It's a moment that we identify with about the city, say it in French because it's very French at first. La ville, le mur, le cri. The city, the wall, which is, of course, the wall of the street, the wall where you have all the publicity, the wall where you can express yourself, the wall where you will have more and more graffitis. Not that graffitis just happen after 45, but in 45 it's becoming really an issue, also because it's becoming a theme and a very, very important and very interesting element for Cartier-Bresson and Brassailles and many more a generation of photographers. As graffiti is more like visual. If you now look at language, you have, of course, the glossolalie, the practice of glossolalie, which will end in the lettrist movement after. And, of course, all this is absolutely moving ideas, elements which are in resonance or very porous to the debate on Art Brut, because, of course, all this questioning about language, about visibility, about the spaces of culture, about what is in, what is out, it's all interconnected, and it's very difficult to think Art Brut outside and in kind of étanchéité out of from this very specific moment. There is also, and I think I'm Plus, I just saw a work by him in the collection here of modern and contemporary art. A very important artist who is not mentioned enough, when we are discussing this point, who is Asgoyon, who had very, very interesting research and work on, in its case, it was between art brut and folk art populaire. I don't like the notion of folk art because I think it's like if it were a translation of art populaire, and folk art is different than, for many reasons. So it's very difficult because we have no other word to translate art populaire, but I prefer the notion of art populaire, which is more direct. We know a little bit better what we say when we speak in terms of art populaire. And on this level, Asgoyon did an amazing research, really, when you speak about artists researching, he did many, many research, photographic campaigns, text, books, and it's very visible. There is a very interesting exhibition at the moment. I think it's coming from somewhere else, but at the moment it's in Valencia at IVAM, and you see most of the work on language, on that popular art, and in a way, Asgoyon is probably could be interesting to. Not to compare, I don't think there is anything to compare, but to parallel with Dubuffet, because I see in Lyon a much more politically compromised thinking, much more subtle, and much more, in a way, open, meaning that it's really opening the gate to many different visual, formal expressions of the times. So they're very generous. And I will end now with the non-generosity, from my point of view, of Jean Dubuffet. There is something which I had always trouble with, is defining and redefining and specifying. And when you read the text, as soon as he's writing an artist, he identified, he welcomed into Art Brut, and one major example is Chessac. When Chessac begins, in French I would say, à relever la tête, begins existing as an artist, being invited in galleries who are mainstream galleries or not at all Art Brut, you really see in the text by Dubuffet, you understand between the lines, I would say in French, and after I can translate, l'Art Brut, c'est les autres. Art Brut are the others. I am not Art Brut. L'Art Brut, c'est les autres. And of course, Chessac, as soon as he is invited in the space of art, the space of artists, he doesn't need anymore, and he doesn't want this Art Brut label. And it's becoming a little bit with Jean Dubuffet. And I think it says a lot on the porosity and the perversity of the notion. So what is now important to know is the destiny of the collection of Jean Dubuffet, because it's also quite interesting for the future, the development of the concept of Art Brut. It's not something which is like 45. 45, it's the official Art Brut. Many people are speaking about Art Brut. Many people are questioning. Many people are comparing works and so on and so forth. And again, Dubuffet already knew many collections and was really, really involved with the art produced in a non-mainstream and non-central cultural spaces from the late 20s. So it's already a long story for him. And after 45, so between his founding Compagnie de l'Art Brut, in English it would be something like Art Brut Company, and which will be as many artists project, and it's not forever, so it will be 48, 51. And at that time, you have a lot of discussions, and he's sharing a lot with, mentioned them already, Breton and Paulhan, and between other ones. And the collection becomes to be quite nomadic, because it's always the problem, I think, the one you have, as soon as you begin to collect and you have many works, the question is where to store, and after eventually where to show, because when you have many discussions going on, the point is also to show the works and to have people looking at it and so on and so forth. So the collection will go first in a kind of a cave, a Galerie Drouin, and after it will be hosted in the 5162, it goes to New York in the house belonging to Alfonso Osorio in East Hampton. And after it comes back to Paris in a mansion, an hôtel particulier, mansion in English, mansion Rue de Sèvres. Open, closed, open, closed. And I remember visiting, so I was very young. I went with my father, so it was kind of, you could visit this place. And Dubuffet is a little bit, I think, is becoming quite upset, I think, after all these years to see that nobody is really interested in French institutions. This is not new. Not only with Art Brut, institutions are very slow in France, especially, and so Dubuffet is becoming a little bit irritated.
Not only in France. The institutions don't care about art.
I can't take responsibility.
Mayor?
And so after a while, he decides to make a donation to Switzerland, to Lausanne, and 71 donation, 75 the works are living, and it's now the wonderful collection you have in Lausanne, with the first curator being Michel Thévaux, who is still active and who is probably one of the most subtle commentator and theoretician of Art Brut up till now, and really making many sometimes unexpected connection with other cultural productions and in not necessarily European countries, and I think very interesting thinker. So it goes to j'ai perdu ma ligne. Voilà. So the collection goes to Lausanne, and it's another moment with the Art Brut, because even so you had all the discussions around Dubuffet, you couldn't say that it was a very I don't know, there was something I forgot to say, that when the collection is leaving France, it's creating a kind of frustration for many people, and this is you have sometimes the good point or the bad things. This is the beginning of the La Racine collection. La Racine, so it's like a word which is built of A with no racine, the A root. So La Racine collection, which is initiated by a woman, Madeleine Lommel, and which will be developed and given in 1999 to the LAM, the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art of Lille, Villeneuve d'Ascq, and it's the first example in France of a public institution which is collecting and showing modern art, contemporary art, and Art Brut. So,
like us, like we are.
Like here. But it's the first time, this is really like in the same museum you have, and after I will come with a flashback, because it's sometimes people that just don't know, but you have other examples. And it's also a moment which is very important, these 70s, because there are two books which are coming out, and because again, Dubuffet, it's one thing, and of course he was really writing a lot, and he began with the fascicule from the Art Brut collection, so a certain number were published in Paris, and after it went on in Lausanne, so you have a huge collection of fascicules, small catalogs, which are written and published about this and that artist from the collection. But, these fascicules are not necessarily well distributed. It's not very well circulated outside from the circle of people who are interested or who are knowledgeable about Art Brut. And this is the situation is changing a little bit in 1972 with the publication by Roger Cardinal, who is a very important British art historian, and is publishing Outsider Art in London, so 72, and after we'll come to the terminology after. And very soon, 1974, Michel Thévaux, who is publishing L'Art Brut, Skira, which is a very well-distributed publication. And again, Michel Thévaux being the first, and will be for a long time, he retired not so long ago, the curator, manager, the man of La Collection de l'Art Brut in Lausanne. So when I said the outsider, now we come to another point. The problem is that in the terminology, the more Art Brut becomes really recognized, interesting, circulated, looked at, the more you have artists added, and the more people are trying to discuss the classifications and to specify. And sometimes, when it's a process which is sometimes very contradictory, because specifying more and more, you despecify, because there is a moment you have so many categories in the category that the category is like deconstructing itself. And then come the word which is the English translation, because when you go to the dictionary, Art Brut, outsider. But outsider is really very different, because outsider, it can be an outsider, somebody who is not playing the game of the cultural scene. It can be somebody who decided not to participate. It can be somebody who doesn't want to show his work. It can be many, many, many different things, outsider. And so you have certain people considering that it's too vague, too inclusive, that they begin to use, and this is 1978 with the exhibition in Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, les singuliers de l'art. And les singuliers de l'art, very difficult to define.
It's another category.
It's another category.
It comes in from
It's a category I find as unsatisfactory than the others, which is les singuliers de l'art. Let's say, in French, I would, of course, some people would be upset, but I don't mind. In French, I would say les petits malins, ou les intellectuels de l'art brut. So meaning those who are, in a way, intentional, who are working, they do whatever they want. It has nothing to do with the mainstream, and they are singular because they do whatever they want, whatever they think. What they think they want, because we all know now that sometimes there's a problem, we don't know what we want. And after you have this, not after, because it's all at the same time, you have all this discussion with folk art, which is also a category which is very, very slippery, because again, it doesn't correspond exactly to art populaire. And in the States, very often, folk art is used in museums or collections, which are, when you look at the works, including pieces, works corresponding to what we would call art brut or outsider. So it's a very, very, and when you begin to discuss with the collectors or the dealers, it's not helping, because it's a very, very, very confusing. So there is another formulation which is added by Michel Thévaux, and this I would consider, because I think that is a very, very subtle man. And it's in French, it's un Suisse français, la neuve, and I like because it's a little bit old ages, la neuve intention. So la neuve intention, the new intention. But it's said in a way, la neuve intention, even in French it sounds a little bit from the past. And la neuve intention is really the idea that you will do something absolutely new, absolutely out of the rules, absolutely out of the any kind of how to say that, inspiration from the cultural space, understood as a history, collection of images, and so on and so forth. And of course, even that, we know that this is not possible. So no, because you have this neuve intention, nobody, maybe except very, very, very heavy psychotic cases, we know that very few subjects are absolutely without any connection with the world. So here we come back to the notion of art brut, which should be, and of course it can't, should be without kind of historicized category, subjects who are living in the middle of nowhere. And we know that this is absolutely not possible. And we know that it's very difficult to understand, even with artists who are absolutely the opposite of insane artists who are meeting on close to a daily level. It's sometimes very difficult, with them to discuss how the ideas are coming from, what kind of inspirations, what did you look at, and so on. So, of course, with certain kind of subject, it's even more difficult. But, of course, they have inspiration. Of course, they can be very sensitive to what they see around, and it's absolutely when you are working very carefully on collections which are already including four or five generations of Art Brut or outsider or whatever artist, you can periodize. You can say this is from the 19th century, the 5th. So meaning that it's absolutely not ahistorical. It is, of course, it has to do with historical moments.
The problem is medication. Medication changed the...
This is possible, but nevertheless, it's you can historicize the works. So this is, and so now I would give a kind of a definition which I find really very saying a lot on the moment where we are. It's what I would call the extended notion of Art Brut. It's recent. It's the definition which is given by the Gallery of Everything, which is an emanation of the Museum of Everything, which opened in London. The Gallery of Everything opened 2016, and the Museum of Everything is from before with a private collection. And the definition is the Gallery of Everything, the collector's owner, manager, being James Brett. So the Gallery of Everything displays self-taught, Art Brut, spiritualist, vernacular, and other non-academic material from the 19th century to the present day, alongside contemporary artworks by diverse creators of every color, class, gender, race, and neurology. So, of course, here you can feel la patte of James, who is a very funny person, but you see a little bit where we are today. You know, it happened that once he called me and he wanted to speak about Haitian art. And I said, my dear, for me, Haitian art is not Art Brut. Haitian art is made by subjects who are working under maybe certain conditions, but it's, so that's where we are. And I think that probably there is one more step now with the official, and you have a lot of noise around that, because of course it's very good for the market, it's very good for the visibility of the works. All this noise about the entry of Art Brut in modern art collections, and especially, of course, institutional collections. So I already mentioned the Lamb of Lille. I already mentioned the National Museum. I didn't. The National Museum of Modern Art in Centre Pompidou was given recently a very, very big collection of Art Brut by Bruno de Charme, and the museum will have to. They were very enthusiastic. We'll have to adapt. And what I found extremely interesting is that everybody was enthusiastic about the collection, but no, it could be interesting to begin to think a little bit on the discourse, on the modalities, on how you show the works, on the what kind of circumstances, etc., etc. And it is when I would, because I think it's coming, could be also an inspiration for some of my colleagues. You know, here I'm coming with an historical flashback, and we are in Portugal, so I will mention what has to be mentioned in Portuguese and not in English, because if not, it would be a little bit crazy. And here we come to a wonderful project, 78, Mario Pedrosa, the really major culture critic from Brazil. Mario Pedrosa, who came back to Brazil after 45 and who exiled by the Estado Novo, and who went back to exile after with the dictatorship in the 60s, and who came back. And when he came back, few years after his coming back, the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro burned. And of course, after the burning of the museum, burning of a large part of the collection, the idea and the discussion in Rio and in Brazil, because it's the discussion which, Rio was and is still a very important city for culture, debates, intellectuals, and so on. So there was a very, very open discussion in order to understand how to move in order to have museums better control, that they're not burning and that they don't have accidents happening often. And so how to reform the museum. And Mario Pedrosa said, but of course we could find changes in the architecture and reinstall the collection, but this is not the point. Where we are now, it's much more important to build up a collection which would take into consideration the social, the momentum, the cultural momentum of Brazil after the dictatorship, after the because this kind of fire was a kind of it was close to symbolical, and he said, I'm very interested in rebuilding a collection which would correspond to the moment we are in and which would be an inspiration. Of course, a cultural inspiration, but also a social and political one. And then he came with this amazing project, which was called the Museu das Origens, le Musée des Origines. And so in Museu das Origens, it was supposed to include 5 different, but very, very organic, very interconnected collections. One, Museu do Índio. Now, the more you look at the collection, the more you look at all the works. In that case, they are more artifacts, but produced before the arrival of the Portuguese. And what we know now from the early Amazonas, it's even more important than in Mario Pedrosa time. So Museu do Índio. Second, Museu, another terminology, Museu de Arte Virgem. The terminology by Pedrosa, which was supposed to include the collection of the Museu de Imagens do Inconsciente. And this is very interesting because when we speak about Dubuffet, yes, 45. But the Museu das Imagens do Inconsciente, it was opened 1952. It became looked at by intellectuals and the same kind of debate, or something corresponding a little bit to the debate you had in Paris. It really began with the exhibitions of 47 and 49, organized by Nils, I don't remember the name. Nils da Silveira, and it's really like open as a museum. And an active museum, meaning it was the works were really, you could see the works in the when it was still in the faculty of spirit, and it still is, because if unfortunately Museu das Origens was not built at the end of the day, but you could go and see and participate to workshops with the people who were there. So sometimes they were certain cases they had to be inside the hospital, but other one they were back and forth, and you have, I don't remember the name, but you have very, very, very interesting experiments in the late 50s and the 60s of very important Brazilian artists who go giving workshops, working with the artists. And I remember letters. Otsika, I'm not sure, because he was not the kind of, maybe he was showing up one day, disappearing one week and coming back, but he knows. It's also the moment where you have all the episode with, we spoke about him, do Espírito Santo. Je me souviens plus de son nom en entier. C'est dans mes notes, mais il faut que je remonte. Oui, on en a parlé dans la voiture. Bispo. Bispo. C'est Corpus Santo. Bispo do Rosário. So it's really a very, very important moment. And when this Museu das Origens would have been open and possible, it would have been one of the first really modern, imaginative, inclusive, productive integration, and in a way which would really help to exchanges, circulation of ideas, and in a way acknowledging the unavoidable porosity of the different categories at a certain moment. And of course it didn't happen, so I think that you still have the museum in the hospital. So now I would like to come to the situation where we are now, and with many questions. And I have to say that after seeing the exhibition first alone with the André, I don't remember your last name. André Sousa, because I'm going to be familiar with Jean. We can say Jean because we know each other. And visiting between us, and after with a group of people, many things. We had some confirmed certain problems I have with, not with the exhibition, because as an exhibition you can select whatever you want, not with the presentation, because it's a very precise and it's a very radical statement. So not this, but you could, when you look at the exhibition, and I think when you look also at the collection, you could, I didn't see it all, but what we saw after, it seems to me that it's one of the many collections of Art Brut where you have a very, very small amount of works which are using numbers, graphism, minimal elements, lines. And I think it's really interesting because you still have this kind of emphasis on Art Brut as not only, but often an art dealing or expressions dealing with organicity, viscerality, excess, and so on and so forth. And I think it's one aspect, but you have many other ones. So for me, it's really a problem that with the passing of time, Art Brut became a kind of style. And it shouldn't be a style. It's not a style. It's a situation.
It's a field, artistic field.
I don't agree. I don't think it's an artistic. Well, if it's a field of certain levels, certain modalities of expression.
Champ artistique, no?
Yeah, what I call the very, very.
It's a style. It's not a style.
And and these days, it seems to me that we have to. We can't avoid certain questioning because it's. I don't think it's a pure by chance. If at the moment when you see the moment we are in, with the institutionalization of Art Brut, the market, the acceleration. So you see more and more collection of Art Brut. In the past, you would have in a collection of Art Brut a certain number of a known artist because of the process, because of the circumstances, because of the priorities. And now it's very rare when you have a collection of Art Brut to find works which are a known artist. So, it has also to do with the fact that to be an artist is to have a name, and we know that the name is very connected also to certain economical considerations. And I was really, really happy a few days ago when I heard a very, very interesting French cultural or literary critic, even though she wrote a very beautiful book, amazing book on art and substances, Cécile Gilbert. And she was asked to comment on the biography which came out 20 years ago in German, but a few weeks ago in French, 20 years for translating the biography on Kafka. And she began saying, Kafka, I want to be honest. So Kafka is maybe not my writer, but what I find extremely important in this biography is that reading the biography, you understand that for Kafka, for a writer, the point is not even to be published. The point is to write and to be able to write at any cost. And I think it's really the question we could have with Art Brut, And these days, you see that there is this kind of acceleration. Of course, and the acceleration is also accelerating the definition, the porous borders. It looks like it is, and so I think it's not either by chance when you have this kind of emphasis on Art Brut, emphasis on Art Brut as which I find very cliché, close to reactionary. Art Brut are the space for freedom, are the space for being independent from any influence, from any reference, from any pressure. All this reactivation of this very naive discourse, because it's also existed in the 40s, especially and precisely at the moment we are living in, where you see neoliberal economy and neoliberal cultural strategies contributing to the growing invisibilization of any complex experimental aesthetical practice and work. So, and I would put it in plural. So, I see a kind of coincidence, which of course it's not a coincidence. So I'm not saying either it's a complot. In cultural strategies, if it would be complete, it would be easier. This is his fault. This is this one. No, it's a little bit more complex. But again, I repeat because I find it extremely paradoxical, and I'm a little bit worried that so few people are able to decodify the trick. That you have here, that again, in a moment when neoliberal economy and I would say even in cultural inculturelles, déculturelles, and cultural strategies are contributing to the growing invisibilization of complex experimental aesthetical practices and works. So it's not by coincidence, and I think it's a very, very dangerous, because you see a very big confusion, and it was very, very visible in a movie. You can see it because it's on Arte, so I think Portugal is part of the EU community. You are part probably of the Arte pot, and so you can see a film which was produced by Arte and Centre Pompidou, 2020, so very recent. It's called La Folie Art Brut, the thickness Art Brut. It's the realizator is Simon Banks. I don't know him, and I think the film was following the Bruno de Charme donation to Pompidou. And when you look at this movie, it's between unbelievable and scaring, because you don't even need to be perverse to read between the lines. It's, what Deleuze would have done. It's transparent. It's just, there is no filter, a friend of mine would say, il n'y a plus de sur moi. Sur moi is what is a small voice telling you that this you can't. Okay. And what do you see? You see a confusion between the categories of subject, the categories of works produced. You see collectors, gallerists. You see gallerists tout court. Just explaining to you that this is art brut and this is not. Why? Because this is selling and this is not selling to the same artist. So you have an artist, he's showing what he's doing, and this is, and you see this poor woman when she looks a little bit, I think she doesn't understand very well, or she doesn't want to resist, or I don't know a problem, but it's a little bit pitiful. And at the end of the day, the two ones who are really amazing, and they are artists, because there is an intentionality. There is a one you collected as well. Huh? It's Wegner.
Yes.
It's prénom.
I'm sorry. I'm getting old.
Wegner is an American artist, and is really, really amazing because he knows he's autist, Asperger. And
Widener.
Widener. Voilà, Widener. And he's explaining that, George Weiner. And it's absolutely amazing because he knows where there is a problem. He was in the street for many years doing more or less the same kind of works. And this is the bad part of the story, because he knows what's happening. He understands what's happening. And I think it's very painful, probably. Anyway, so he was producing this drawing using numbers, using lines, this kind of very, very obsessional drawing. But the composition is very, very interesting. And the way is really not even explaining, the statement. It's a statement. Because they're explaining, I don't like too much, we're not at school every day. So the statement is making on his work, departing from his condition. He knows his condition. He knows that art was really something keeping him standing, even in the street. And when it comes after to the construction, the numbers, he knows he's hypermnesic. You can be hypermnesic and be intelligent. It's not, sometimes it's even helping to be hypermnesic. And it comes to the point that there is a moment, all these numbers, and this is, in a way, the inaugural trauma. Of course, it's something which is a trauma reinvented, which is even in French, I don't remember the word, the Titanic. When the Titanic is but how do you say in English? Because even in French, I can't find the word. Il a sombré, comment on dit, le coulage du Titanic. The thinking. Thank you very much. I'm a little bit tired and too many languages. So the naufrage, voilà, le naufrage, the thinking. It's about the thinking of the Titanic and the 1,500 dead people. So of course it's, but if you wanted to be a little bit provocative, you could say that when you would speak, or you were not speaking, it was also something he said in one interview, and after it was the legend. Joseph Beuys, when he's beginning to build all the story of when his plane is and it's falling and is saved by the the tribe, the tribal people, and so on and so forth. It's an inaugural trauma, which has been historicized, which admits the legend. And and hearing this artist, I would say, it was absolutely that. So, what kind of art brut is it? And I think in that case, I would say that the challenge of art brut, if we want to keep this category, which for me is maybe not necessary, it's the inclusivity. Meaning because when I'm hearing at this artist, when I'm looking at the work, it's also connecting me or eventually helping me to read differently other works which are in the museum, or which I know, which I saw, which are not, of course, labelized art brut. So I think this could be because, it's also very paradoxical to have on one end art modern, always defined, even if now we know that many discourse are a little bit like me, a little bit tired. This notion of art modern as the space of freedom. You can do everything, and especially after the 80s, everything is possible and no limits. Why, in that case, why do you need a category of art brut, which should be another kind of freedom, when everything is possible into modern art? So from a certain perspective, I would say that I'm not interested in the category, but I think that a possible and interesting, a challenging deconstruction of the category could be a more inclusive space for modern art. So a more inclusive, and retrospectively, and now. So to pay attention to certain practices, to certain formal organizations, and to look at it in a more, to be more curious, to be more open, and eventually to, in a way, that you have a little bit more oxygen, because these days on one hand you have all this emphasis on art brut, but at the same time you see many works now supposed to be works of art, which are, from my point of view, I would call that cultural design, but it's a kind of gadgetization of artists, and I won't mention them because I'm always polite. But you have certain productions from the last 20 years. You have the beginning fantastic oeuvre, and after you have a gadgetization. It's like an oeuvre is.
Please names.
No name. Yeah. An oeuvre is always a strong work is always shaky. The greatest art is always shaky, and when it's not shaky anymore, there is a problem there is a problem in the process. So I think it's a very, for me, paradoxical to see that you need, in a way, art brut. You need this kind of pseudo injection of freedom, of craziness, in a moment where everything is made, in a way. Well, many things are, again, it's not a complot, it's a objective situation. Many things are made in order to freeze any radical, any challenging, any rough, formal, and ideal intellectual proposal. So this is one. So I think this is quite important to keep that in mind when you see all these circles around art brut. So I could finish here because I think the idea is maybe it will probably help me to develop a few other things when